In 1923, a coal miner in West Virginia walked off the job with nothing but a broken back and $14. 20 years later, he owned 3 properties, a hardware store, and sent 2 sons to college without borrowing a cent. He never earned more than $4,000 in a single year. What he had, instead of money, was a set of habits so effective that the men who understood them built the American middle class from the ground up. These habits were not taught in schools. They were practiced in garages, kitchens, and church parking lots, and almost none of them survived past 1980. Number 18, they kept a reputation ledger. Before credit scores existed, a man's word was his borrowing power. In small towns and immigrant neighborhoods, businessmen kept mental and sometimes written records of who paid on time, who showed up when they said they would, and who could be trusted on a handshake. A coal miner who repaid a neighbor's loan ahead of schedule could walk into any hardware store in the county and buy on account without paperwork. The reputation was the collateral. Men who understood this paid debts first, showed up early, and never promised what they could not deliver. The result was access to informal credit networks that charged no interest and required no application. Your great-grandfather did not need a bank to tell him he was creditworthy. His neighborhood already knew. Number 17, they mastered one trade deeply before branching. The broke American who became self-made did not scatter effort across 5 opportunities. He picked the thing he could do better than anyone in a 3-county radius and drove it into the ground until it produced. A blacksmith in 1910 Tennessee who became the best in his county did not stay a blacksmith forever, and he used that mastery as the first rung. Men who ran 3 mediocre operations simultaneously, consistently, lost to the man running one exceptional one. Diversification came later. After the foundation was solid, the foundation came from depth, not breadth. Number 16, they bought land nobody else wanted yet. Shrewd working-class men had a habit of acquiring land on the edges, not the farmland in the center of town where prices reflected current value, but scrubby parcels at the outskirts nobody could immediately use. A factory worker in 1910 Akron who spent $40 on a quarter acre at the edge of development and held it 15 years often found the city had grown around him. He had not speculated. He had understood that cities grow outward and that patience is a financial strategy available to anyone with the discipline to wait. Number 15, they reinvested before they rewarded themselves. When the first business produced profit, the profit went back into the business before a single dollar improved the man's personal lifestyle. A new tool, a second piece of equipment, a small inventory expansion. Men who pulled profit out of young operations to improve their own comfort consistently stunted what they were building. Men who starved themselves of lifestyle improvements and fed the business instead created something that eventually paid them back at multiples they could not have predicted. Number 14. They read contracts word for word before signing anything. The self-made man of the early 20th century had often been burned once by something he did not read and never allowed it to happen again. A farmer in Georgia in 1904 who lost half his crop yield to a poorly understood sharecropping contract became the most careful reader of legal language in his county by 1910. He passed that habit to his sons. They passed it to theirs. The family that produced 2 lawyers and a banker by 1950 traced the origin back to one document a grandfather read too late. Number 13. They controlled their information carefully. The self-made American did not broadcast his financial situation to neighbors, relatives, or business associates, not because he was dishonest, but because he understood that visible wealth attracts solicitation and visible poverty attracts dismissal. He lived in the deliberate middle, presenting competence without displaying holdings. A man known to have cash was approached for loans and schemes. A man known to have nothing was denied opportunity. The self-made man presented a version of himself that invited partnerships and repelled charity cases simultaneously. This was not deception, it was positioning. The habits so far are about protection. What comes next is different. These are the habits of accumulation. The methods by which men who had protected their small amounts began turning those amounts into something that compounded beyond what wages alone could ever produce. Number 12. They used other people's labor without exploiting it. The moment a man could afford to hire one helper, he did, not to extract, but to multiply. A plumber who could complete 3 jobs a day alone could complete 5 with a competent apprentice. The 2 extra jobs paid the apprentice's wage and then some. The plumber's time was freed for higher value work while the apprentice handled the routine. The men who recognized this as leverage built businesses. The ones who saw the helper as an expense rather than a multiplier stayed solo operators until they aged out. Number 11. They watched where the town was spending money and moved toward it. A barber in Chicago in the 1920s who noticed that nearby factories were bringing in workers who needed haircuts every 2 weeks, opened on Sunday. He opened at 5 in the morning. He extended hours to match shift changes at the plants. By 1928, he had 2 chairs and a waiting list. He had not invented anything. He had observed what others ignored and responded before anyone else did. The habit of watching what a community was already spending money on and serving that spending more conveniently produced more self-made men in American urban history than any other single practice. Number 10. They turned every skill into a second income before the first one failed. This was not pessimism, it was engineering. A machinist who also repaired clocks was building a second floor on a structure that already had a first. Depression-era records from cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh show that households with 2 income sources, even when one was small and informal, survived economic contractions at dramatically higher rates than households depending entirely on a single employer. The adjacent skill cost little to develop and paid in proportion to how badly the first income disappeared. Number 9. They treated every expense as an investment question. Before any money left their hands, the self-made man asked one question: does this come back? New work boots came back if they lasted 3 years instead of 1. A night class in bookkeeping came back when the man could manage his own accounts without paying someone else. The expenses that did not come back were minimized without sentimentality. Entertainment and status purchases were not eliminated entirely. They were subordinated to expenses that produced returns, and the discipline of making that distinction automatically was worth more than any single investment the man ever made. Number 8. They kept fixed costs permanently below their worst earning year. Not their average year, their worst. The self-made American built his household and business to survive at the bottom of his income range. When good years came, the surplus went into assets, not into higher monthly obligations. A man who earned $1,800 in his worst year and $3,200 in his best did not build a life that cost $2,500 a month. He built one that cost $1,400 and invested the rest. When the bad year came, and it always came, he was inconvenienced. His neighbor, who had spent to the ceiling of his best year, was destroyed. Number 7. They networked up, not sideways. The self-made man did not only spend social energy among people in exactly his current situation, he sought deliberately the company of men one level above where he stood, not to impress them, but to observe them. How did a man 10 years ahead on the same road dress for a business meeting, handle a disputed invoice, speak about money in public? These observations were absorbed and replicated by men who understood that proximity to achievement was itself a form of education No institution offered. The barbershop, the church pew, the civic organization, these were classrooms for men who knew how to use them. Number 6, they never confused movement with progress. A man could work 14 hours a day and build absolutely nothing. The self-made American learned to distinguish between motion and direction. Busyness that did not accumulate toward a specific outcome was noise. They periodically stopped, assessed what the activity was actually building, and made the ruthless calculation about whether to continue or redirect. Most people never make that assessment. They stay in motion and call it progress until they look up and realize they have been circling. Number 5, they let their reputation do the selling. The self-made man rarely advertised in the modern sense. He made the first 10 customers so satisfied that customers 11 through 50 arrived without being invited. A carpenter in Memphis in the 1930s who finished a job 2 days early and fixed a small problem he had not been hired to address did not need to place an ad in the paper. He needed the homeowner to speak his name at the next dinner party. Word of mouth in tight communities traveled faster and carried more weight than any printed notice, and it cost nothing but the discipline to do work that deserved to be talked about. Number 4, they paid themselves a salary from their business from the first week. This sounds counterintuitive alongside the earlier advice about reinvesting, but the distinction is precision. The self-made man separated what he paid himself as an operator from what the business retained as capital. He paid himself a modest fixed amount weekly, treated it as non-negotiable, and built his household budget around that number alone. This forced the business to generate enough revenue to meet payroll, and it prevented the household from raiding business capital during lean months. The men who blurred the line between business money and personal money consistently could not tell if the business was profitable. The men who maintained the separation always knew exactly where they stood. Number 3, they read obsessively in their field and adjacent ones. The self-made man read trade publications, legal notices, agricultural bulletins, business journals, and the financial pages of his local newspaper with the same regularity that other men read sports scores, not because he was intellectually ambitious, but because information was the raw material of competitive advantage, and it was available to anyone who bothered to acquire it. A hardware store owner in 1915 who read the trade journals knew that a new lumber supply chain was forming in the Pacific Northwest 6 months before his competitor did. He adjusted his inventory. His competitor did not. That 6-month advantage was worth more than any single transaction in his career. Number 2, they stayed solvent through contractions by holding cash everyone else spent. During boom periods, the American economy invited spending. Credit was available. Consumer goods multiplied. Neighbors bought. The self-made man bought less than he could afford during booms because he understood that contractions were not accidents. They were scheduled events whose timing was uncertain, but whose arrival was guaranteed. The cash he accumulated while others spent became the weapon he used to acquire assets when those same people were forced to sell at distressed prices. The Depression-era fortunes that survived into the 1950s were almost universally built by men who had been liquid when everyone around them was overextended. They did not predict the crash. They simply refused to participate in the excess that preceded it. Number 1, they defined success in terms of ownership, not income. Income without ownership is a treadmill. The moment you stop running, it stops paying. The self-made American pointed every other habit on this list toward a single destination, something he owned outright: land, a building, a business, a trade that produced income independent of his daily labor. The coal miner from West Virginia who started with $14 and ended with 3 properties and a hardware store did not measure his success by what he earned in any given year. He measured it by what would still be producing income the year after he died. He built things that outlasted him, and he did it with habits so straightforward that the only question left is why everyone stopped teaching them. These 18 habits did not require genius, privilege, or fortunate circumstances. They required a particular relationship with time, specifically the willingness to make present sacrifices for future positions that could not be seen yet. That willingness is rarer than it sounds, which is why the men who possessed it stood out so clearly from the men who did not. They knew. Now, you do too.